With the respect to voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont. But there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left? I'm talking to you.
I don't know the answer, Senator.
Yeah, you do know the answer to that.
Don't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You just said I know the answer. I said I don't know the answer.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Bondi. I have noticed that at various times when one of my colleagues is pressing you, you come up with something in their background. So I'll be waiting for my turn, but you don't have to do it right now. So let me get to my questions. One of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that it's really tough on the various federal workforce, including our law enforcement folks, who are not getting paid because of the shutdown. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. But I also think that wasn't the whole story. There is an issue here that's going to affect Americans, whether they voted for President Trump or voted for Vice President Harris, and that is the loss of health care, where on November 1st, everyone who is getting Affordable Care Act help to buy insurance is going to get the notice of premium increases. And I got a letter just today from a Vermont family, nuclear family of 5, husband and wife, 54 and 55, with 3 kids. One of whom has acute myeloid leukemia. And the apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to health care for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
What unfolded in that Senate hearing between Senator Peter Welch and Attorney General Pam Bondi was far more than a tense exchange. It was a revealing moment about truth, accountability, and the moral compass of American democracy. What Welch did in that room wasn't about partisanship, it was about principle. He represented the voice of every American who believes that integrity still has a place in government, that words must mean something, and that facts cannot be twisted to serve ideology. When Senator Welch asked Bondi, "What do you mean by the left?" it sounded like a simple question, but beneath that was something much deeper. It was a test of honesty. That phrase, "taken over by the left," has been used repeatedly to discredit elections, to sow distrust in the democratic process, and to justify intrusive, politically motivated investigations. Welch was not just demanding a definition, he was exposing a mindset that treats political opponents as enemies rather than fellow citizens, a mindset that uses fear to justify control. Bondi's hesitation, her evasions, and her repeated fallback on empty assurances about fair and free elections spoke volumes. She could not define what the left meant in factual terms because it wasn't based on facts. It was a political weapon, a narrative crafted to make half of the country seem illegitimate, to cast doubt on votes simply because they weren't cast for the right party. And Welch refused to let that slide. He pressed because he understood the danger. When the nation's top law enforcement officials begin to label voters, when they send letters demanding private voting information under the guise of protecting integrity, we inch closer to something that no democracy should tolerate: government using its power to intimidate the governed. Welch's calm persistence in that moment was a reminder of what real oversight looks like. He wasn't grandstanding. He was defending the foundation of our democratic system, that power must always answer to truth.
Senator Welch, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to health care, the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want health care for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down the government.
Let me
that's
be clear.
That's one of the sticking points, and I don't know if you voted for that.
All right, well, this actually is important to all of us, and the lament I have is that if this health care goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate. And that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress.
He didn't just talk about policies or statistics. He spoke about people. He told the story of a family in Vermont struggling to afford treatment for a child with leukemia, a family terrified of what would happen if political games caused their health premiums to triple. That wasn't theater. It was reality. It was a call to remember that behind every policy debate are real human beings whose lives hang in the balance. And that's the stark difference between the two approaches on display. Welch spoke from empathy and evidence, trying to find common ground for all Americans, red states, blue states, it didn't matter. Bondi, on the other hand, reached for division, for the familiar scapegoat of the left, even suggesting that Democrats wanted to give health care to illegal aliens, as if compassion were something to be ashamed of. That deflection wasn't just false, it was deliberate, an attempt to redirect moral responsibility. What Welch did next was subtle, but powerful. He dismantled that narrative not by shouting her down, but by bringing the conversation back to what matters: people's health, their livelihoods, and their right to honest governance. He showed that real leadership is not about scoring points, it's about solving problems. He invited collaboration instead of confrontation, saying clearly that Democrats want to negotiate and find a path forward. That's the type of governance this country needs, one grounded in sincerity, not sound bites. By the end of the hearing, one thing was clear. Welch wasn't just defending his party, he was defending democratic integrity itself. He reminded the nation that accountability isn't partisan, it's patriotic.
Another topic, with the respect to voting rights and the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
Right.
includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out,
That's perfectly legal.
but there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that. But I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country.
Okay, let
Senator,
me-
I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it? Who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states. And you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is, the Secretary of State is. And you can resolve that with her. But
And we have every right to have that information.
Yeah, but here's
Senator.
where I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it
You're
over?
a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against a state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that obligation to have a factual basis before you proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and I
asking-
take fair and free elections in this
No,
country
we
very
all-
seriously.
we all
and that
do.
information, our office is entitled to have that information.
But
And we
the
are
question
involved
here-
in litigation on that. And I
here's the
assume we'll be
question
involved
I
in
have.
litigation with
We have-
Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was the treasurer for many years. and also the Secretary of State with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office, and you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said. We've asked that of every state, Senator.
Right, and I'm asking about Vermont and what the factual basis is, but we can move on. You've mentioned that you can't discuss pending litigation, and I think the committee by and large accepted that answer. But I did notice that you spoke at great length about pending litigation, specifically with respect to the questions Senator Cruz asked you about the sentencing of the Kavanaugh defendant. That's pending, right?
He was sentenced to 8 years.
I understand that, but that's on a...
His challenge to Bondi, "What do you mean by the left?" has become a defining question for our times. Because in that single line lies the choice before us. Do we allow power to be guided by fear and division, or do we insist that it be grounded in truth and fairness? Viewers should take away more than the clash. They should take away the lesson. Welch's composure under fire, his insistence on evidence, and his focus on the people most affected by policy all demonstrate what public service should look like. It's not about winning arguments. It's about standing for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. And that's why this moment matters. It's a reminder that democracy doesn't just defend itself. It depends on people like Senator Welch and on citizens willing to demand the same courage and clarity from their leaders. So, as we reflect on that exchange, let it be a call to action. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never let anyone convince you that asking for truth is partisan. Truth belongs to everyone, and protecting it is how we keep democracy alive.